My client, Edie Windsor, has truly become an A-list celebrity. She's 85 years old. She lives 4 blocks away from me in New York City. She literally cannot leave her apartment without someone coming up to her and asking her for an autograph, for a selfie, for a photograph. We literally were, just 2 nights ago, went to go see a show together in Broadway, and as we were heading home in Times Square, 3 separate people came up to her asking for her photograph and asking for an autograph. Why is that? Well, first of all, it helps to win a landmark case before the United States Supreme Court, which Edie did. Second of all, Edie herself and her life story has truly become an icon, not only, I would say, in the gay community, but in the American community. So why is that? Well, first of all, there was great press. Here's the article that was in the New Yorker by my friend Ariel Levy. I can't read to you the first line because it wouldn't be appropriate, but feel free to read it for yourselves. Last year, Edie was up to be Time Magazine Person of the Year. I have to confess that she didn't quite make it. She came in as runner-up. The person who made it was the Pope. Edie wants you to know, however, that she was okay with that. She understands, especially after the events at the Vatican this week. I'm sure she's even happier about it. Moving from the sublime to the ridiculous, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, not too far from here. And if you had told me when I was growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, that one day I would be an out lesbian, litigation partner at a firm like Paul Weiss, that I would be married with a child, and that I would win a landmark United States Supreme Court case, and most of all, that I would be on the pages of Cosmo magazine, I would have told you that you were going to way too many Grateful Dead concerts. So, what is it about this case? Why is it that Edie, in this case, has become so important? Well, as I said before, I think some of it, and most of it, has to do with the facts of Edie's life. Let me tell you a little bit about that, and then what I'd like to do is bring you a little bit into the Supreme Court courtroom on the day of March 27th, 2013, when I argued the case. I had 15 minutes to argue, so that's a minute more than I have to speak to you tonight. You can't videotape in the Supreme Court. Someone actually got arrested and put in jail for trying last year, but they do have audio clips, so I'm going to play for you a couple of the audio clips. But before we get there, let me tell you about Edie. Edie grew up during the Depression in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her father actually lost his business during the Depression, and they had to move in with relatives. She went to college at Temple University, and in college, she understood, she realized she was a lesbian. This was the early 1950s, however, and according to Edie, the idea that she would live her life, her words, as a queer back in the early 1950s was simply inconceivable to her. So what did she do? Well, like a lot of women at the time, she got married. She got married to a guy by the name of Windsor. Windsor was her brother's best friend. He and her brother had fought together in World War II, and he was an old family friend, and they were married. Needless to say, the marriage did not last very long. After only several months, Edie told her husband that he deserved to be loved the way he deserved to be loved, and that she needed something else. So essentially, in the early 1950s, she came out to her husband, and they divorced amicably. Well, it's a great story, but why is this story so important? Well, one of the arguments that people have made in the past to explain why it was okay to treat gay people differently under the law was the argument that, well, we really don't know who gay people are. We don't really know what it means. People can change. They have a choice. You can be gay on Monday and not gay on Thursday. And therefore, it's okay to discriminate against gay people. And one of the best things that I think has ever happened to me in my entire life is that the other side in the case decided to use Edie's marriage to a guy as an example for why to prove that gay people had a choice about being gay. When we first heard that they were going to make this argument, we literally did the hustle in my office in New York. Why? Because think about it for a second. The story of Edie's marriage proves exactly the opposite. If Edie had had a choice about being gay, she'd still be married to Windsor and probably be living with grandkids in Philadelphia. The truth is she didn't have a choice. And that's why she had the enormous courage that she did in the 1950s to come out to her husband, and like so many other people, including Robbie Kaplan, 20 years later, to move to New York in order to be gay. So when Edie moved to New York City, she had a problem. The biggest problem that she had actually was not the fact that she was a lesbian, because back then, anyone who was middle class or above, who was gay or lesbian, was totally in the closet. You could not live your life any other way, and everyone was totally in the closet. The bigger problem that Edie had is that she was a woman, and she had always assumed that her husband would support her and that she wouldn't have to have a job, and now she needed a job. So because she had been good at math, believe it or not, in high school, she entered the mathematics program graduate school at NYU, and she got her master's degree in math, and she became one of the first software programmers ever in the United States. In order to earn her way through grad school, she needed a job. And she got a job on what was then the largest computer in the world, called the UNIVAC computer in Chelsea, New York. And that computer was being operated by the Atomic Energy Commission. So one day she's at her apartment, and she gets a letter from the FBI. And the letter says, "We'd like you to come in to talk to you about your security clearance for your job. We don't think you need a lawyer yet, but we'd like to speak to you." Upon receiving this letter, Edie was terrified, and her terror was justified. Why? Because at that point in time, in the 1950s, this was even into the 60s and 70s, it was illegal, it was a felony, punishable by over a year in prison, for anyone who was a homosexual to have any job whatsoever with the federal government. And Edie was afraid that the FBI was onto her, and they would ask her if she was a lesbian. So what did she do? Well, she did a little research under New York law. It turns out she was correct, that for a gay woman at the time, for a lesbian as opposed to a gay man, what was truly illegal was to appear as a man. So she showed up at her FBI interview in high heels, a frilly dress, and crinolines, hoping, as she said, to throw the FBI off their game. Fortunately for Edie, and fortunately, I would venture to say, for the rest of the United States of America, the FBI never asked her if she were a lesbian. All they really cared about is whether her sister had friends who were communists in the teachers' union. This is the McCarthy period, and she got her security clearance. She then went on to meet a woman a couple years later by the name of Thea Spire, and they fell in love. And in 1967, keep that in mind, 1967, one day when they were driving in their car, Thea pulled over by the side of the road, got down on her hands and knees, and asked Edie to marry her. That fact is a fact that never ceases to amaze me. Why? Because 1967 was 2 years before the Stonewall riots that led to the modern gay civil rights movement. The idea that 2 years before Stonewall, two women could have had the self-esteem, the foresight, the courage to even imagine that they would one day be married is truly an incredible fact. Then the heroic part. Edie and Thea went on to live their lives together for the next 44 years. Unfortunately, Thea was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and over time lost the use of her legs and then her arms. By the time she died, she was completely paralyzed. Edie has said that the diagnosis happened to both of them, and she did everything she could to make sure that as little in their lives changed as possible, so that by the day that Thea died, she actually still had patients she was supposed to see that day. Think about the wedding vows, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. That's a couple who lived those vows. And then, upon Thea's death, because of this terrible statute that we overturned called DOMA, Edie was stuck with a $363,000 estate tax bill solely because she was gay. That's where I come in. That's the case. I'm now going to bring you into the Supreme Court, and we're going to hear from the justice, also known as Notorious RBG. And you're going to hear right now why Justice Ginsburg so deserves that moniker.
The problem is that it would totally thwart the state's decision that there is a marriage between two people for the federal government then to come in and say, no joint return, no marital deduction, no Social Security benefits. Your spouse is very sick, but you can't get leave. People, if that set of attributes, one might well ask, what kind of marriage is this? They're not a question of additional benefits. I mean, they touch every aspect of life. Your partner is sick. Social Security, I mean, it's pervasive. It's not as though, well, there's this little federal sphere and it's only a tax question. It's, as Justice Kennedy said, 1,100 statutes, and it affects every area of life. And so you would be really diminishing what the state has said is marriage. You're saying, no, state, there are two kinds of marriages. The full marriage and then the sort of skim milk marriage.
Skim milk marriage. We spent hours and hours in our case agonizing about how to explain to the Supreme Court that what DOMA did is treat gay people like second-class citizens. Hours and hours of attorney time trying to figure out the best way to get that idea across. And there you heard it from Justice Ginsburg, off the cuff on the Supreme Court bench, describe it in better terms than anything we possibly could have said: skim milk marriage. That was what was wrong with not allowing gay people recognition. That's what's wrong with not allowing gay people to marry today. Now we're going to get to the fun stuff. You're going to hear the judges question me, and then I'm going to bring you up to date on where we are today.
There is little doubt that the answer to the question of why Congress singled out gay people's marriages for disrespect for DOMA, the answer can't be uniformity, as we've discussed. It can't be cost savings, because you still have to explain then why the cost savings is being wrought at the expense of married couples who are gay. And it can't be any of the state interests that weren't discussed, but questions of family law and parenting and marriage are done by the states, not by the federal government. The only conclusion that could be drawn is what was in the House report, which is moral disapproval of gay people, which the Congress thought was permissible in 1996 because it relied on the court's Bowers decision, but this court has said was wrong, not only at the time it was overruled in Lawrence, but was wrong when it was decided.
So 84, it's the same question I asked before. 84 senators based their vote on moral disapproval of gay people?
No, I think what's true, Mr. Chief Justice, is that times can blind. And that back in 1996, people did not have the understanding that they have today, that there was no distinction, there was no constitutionally permissible distinction.
Well, does that mean times can blind? Does that mean they did not base their votes on moral disapproval?
You know, some clearly did. I think it was based on an understanding that incorrect understanding that gay couples were fundamentally different than straight couples, an understanding that I don't think exists today, and that's the sense I'm using, that times can blind. I think there was, we all can understand that people have moved on this and now understand that there is no such distinction. So I'm not saying it was animus or bigotry. I think it was based on a misunderstanding of gay people and their relations.
Why are you so confident in that judgment? How many states permit gay couples to marry?
Today, 9 year.
9. And so there's been this sea change between now and 1996.
I think with respect to the understanding of gay people and their relationship, there has been a sea change, Your Honor.
So that day in the courtroom, my parents from Cleveland were sitting there. And my mom told me that afterwards, when I had that exchange with Justice Scalia and when I had the exchange with Chief Justice Roberts, my mom was convinced that some marshals were going to come over to me with handcuffs and lead me away, and I had to explain to her that that was my job. A moral understanding The key to our case was that there was a moral understanding today that gay people are no different than anyone else, and that the marriage that Edie Windsor and Thea Spire had was no different than the marriage of anyone else. So what has happened? At the time I argued the case, there were 9 states, as you heard me say, that allowed gay couples to marry. That's what the country looked like at the time we filed the case. There were only 5 states, and it didn't include New York, which was partly my fault because I lost the New York case in 1996, so I had to pay Edie back by winning this one. That's what the country looks like today. 29 states. By the end of the week or next week, there will be 35 states, or the vast majority of the American population, that allow gay couples to marry. And the reason why is 40 court decisions, all since the Windsor case, all relying on the Windsor case to extend rights to gay people. It's been a great honor to do this. It's what life's all about. Thank you for listening to me tonight.